Hey everybody, it's Mr. Stafford, and today we are going to talk about the progressive presidents. We're going to start with Teddy Roosevelt. We're going to spend most of our time probably on Teddy Roosevelt, and then we'll move into William Howard Taft and Woodrow Wilson. We're going to focus primarily this chapter on domestic policy during the progressive era. These guys are known as the progressive presidents. And then in our next chapter, we'll talk a little bit about their foreign policy. All right, so let's start with the story of how TR became president of the United States. In 1900, the election of 1900 was a rematch between William McKinley and William Jennings Bryan. You may remember in 1896, those were the two nominees from the Democratic and Republican Party. So William McKinley had won in 1896. William McKinley, the Republican, would win again in 1900. In 1900, he had selected, the Republicans had nominated Teddy Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, to be his vice presidential candidate. Now, shortly after his election, William McKinley was assassinated, and Teddy Roosevelt was sworn in September of 1901 as president of the United States. Teddy Roosevelt was excited about this. He writes about trying to contain his enthusiasm because it's not the best look to be celebrating the death of an American president. But Teddy Roosevelt had long aspired to this type of position and this type of authority. So let's talk about his domestic policies, his domestic program, beginning with the 3 C's. So Teddy Roosevelt proposed a domestic plan known as the square deal, right? There's a good equal four-sided object that is a square, represented the equal balance that the system he proposed would create for the American people. He felt that things were out of whack, that corporations had too much power and too much control. Teddy Roosevelt is going to use the power of the presidency like no other president since Abraham Lincoln. He loves to lead. He's a leader. He's a fighter. And in fact, oftentimes he would invite people over to his house to wrestle or to fight with him or to box with him. And he felt that it was his role now to fight those who were acting against America's best interest. And often that ended up being the leaders of industry, these captains of industries that we talked about last week. So how did Teddy Roosevelt take on the corporations? Well, he used the Sherman Antitrust Act to prevent the creation of new monopolies and break up established trusts that interfered with free trade. Teddy Roosevelt considered himself to be a trust buster. Now, he argued that he was not anti-business. He was actually pro-business. He thought that large-scale business, like we were seeing during the Second Industrial Revolution, was a natural result of modern industrialization. But he firmly believed that those who abused their power deserved punishment. He didn't like all of the things that the industrialists were doing that were an abuse of the power that they had gained. So he simply wanted to prove to those corporations that government, not business, ran the country. So, some examples. In 1903, TR established the Bureau of Corporations, which empowered the government entity to investigate business practices. He also brought a lawsuit against the Northern Securities Trust that was a railroad monopoly, and the Supreme Court ordered the company to dissolve the monopoly. He added departments of labor and commerce to the cabinet. He's going to push acts of legislation through Congress that would give the United States government greater power and authority to regulate these businesses. A classic example of Teddy Roosevelt stepping in on behalf of labor and against business was the coal strike of 1902. Workers were seeking a pay raise and a decrease in working hours, and the owners were refusing to negotiate or deal with the union. So TR calls the owners and the head of the union to the White House and threatened to use the United States Army to keep the mines open and the miners working. The owners are going to eventually back down. What they had tried to do was lock the workers out and refuse to pay them and refuse to produce coal. Teddy Roosevelt said this is against the interest of the American people. If they don't have coal, they're not going to be able to keep their homes warm. Our industry is going to die. And so you got to work this out, he tells the owners and the union bosses. So the owners eventually are going to back down. Teddy Roosevelt is going to appoint an arbitration commission, so a group of independent outsiders to rule on the disputes. And the ruling is going to give the miners a 10% increase in pay and limit their day to a 9-hour working day. Teddy Roosevelt is widely credited for ending this strike. He's stepping in and using his power as president of the United States to control and regulate the power of these corporations. Now, he didn't do this equally across the board with all big corporations. In fact, he viewed his responsibility as president of the United States as a responsibility that required him to attack only the bad trusts. It's only if you are using your power for bad and not good. So in this political cartoon, we see an illustration of that Teddy Roosevelt was seeking to restrain the trusts, to control the good trusts, and to eliminate the bad trusts. All right, let's move on to that second C, consumer protection. Teddy Roosevelt was an avid reader. He taught himself a speed reading method, and so it said he would read a book in the morning and a book in the evening. And in the early 1900s, one of the books that he read was a book by an author named Upton Sinclair called The Jungle. You may read this book in your English class, but this book was meant to further the cause of socialism during the Progressive Era. But what everybody focused on was the conditions that this book reported of the meatpacking industry. It was disgusting. In the book, Upton Sinclair tells stories of workers falling into vats of acid, cutting off their finger, getting mixed up with the meat that sits in warehouses until it goes rancid. And then they use food coloring and chemicals to try and bring it back to a state that they can sell it in a market. And he says this is a danger to the American public. And so his goal of consumer protection is to use the United States government to step in and regulate business again in the interest of protecting consumers. So he pushes for a law called the Meat Inspection Act of 1906. And this is going to outlaw misleading labels and dangerous chemical preservations. This is going to be a major act of legislation during the Progressive Era that Teddy Roosevelt is going to stand behind. It's also going to allow the government to inspect factories, to shut down potentially factories that are not following certain health protocols. So this is the first time that we start to see the government step in on behalf of consumers. So when you buy products at the store today and you can trust that they are not going to poison you or kill you, you have the Teddy Roosevelt administration and the progressive Congress of this time to thank for that. In addition, TR is going to urge congressional approval of what is known as the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. This is going to require accurate labeling of ingredients of foods and drugs. And so when you look at the back of a package and you see the ingredient list, right, you can thank the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 as well. All right, the last C, conservation. Teddy Roosevelt is an outdoor enthusiast, and he is going to make one of his priorities conservation of American natural resources. Now, he's going to go back and forth with a man named John Muir, who will spend a lot of his time and live out the end of his life in California. John Muir has the president's ear on a lot of these issues and tries to convince the president to take a position on conservation that is more about preservation. Let's just keep nature as it is. The aesthetic value of nature is inherently valuable and worth protecting. Teddy Roosevelt is pushed on the other side of the argument to develop our resources, our natural resources. Let's go in and let's log those forests. Let's drill for that oil. We are an industrial nation. Let's not waste these resources. And he's going to fall somewhere in between those two positions. He's going to add massive areas to the national forest system, over 190 million acres. This is considered to be one of the great achievements of the Roosevelt administration. He's going to transfer forests to the U.S. Forest Service. So the United States is going to be responsible for a lot of these forests and thereby protect them from development in the states. He's going to withdraw millions of acres of public land that were for sale to protect resources. This is the beginnings of our national park system. But he's going to develop that land as well. And he will use some of this land and he will develop some of this land for water systems, dams, canal systems with the Newlands Act of 1902. So while there was a lobby pushing for preservation and there was a lobby pushing for total development, Roosevelt tried to do a little bit of both. Protect our natural resources, but solve the problems that we could by developing our resources wisely. Okay, so those are the 3 C's, a quick glimpse at Teddy Roosevelt and his domestic policy. In my next lecture, I'm going to talk about President Taft, President Wilson, and a little bit more about Teddy Roosevelt and really about their foreign policies. All right, thank you for watching, and I will see you in class.